And welcome everybody. So nice to see so many of you here live rather than waiting for the recording, which is great. So who am I? So my name is Rachel Mitchell. I am a self-confessed information governance control freak. And I am a consultant in both training and in terms of consultancy with your organisation in all things information governance. So I work with leadership through data, and I can help you to put the information governance also into technology. So what are we going to talk about today? So we are going to talk about whether all things to do basically with records management. But before I do, because I'm already distracted by the pictures on my slides, we will also touch on AI. All of the pictures are AI generated on my slides because we're going to have a casino theme. And as you can see, the picture on my slides looks slightly different to me in person. So that will be interesting, hopefully, as we go through to see how well AI has generated those for me. So this presentation is going to provide an overview of records management, covering its fundamental principles, thinking about enterprise content, management, risk, governance, technology, but most importantly, practical steps, because it's a basic introduction to records management. Or, as I'd like to have the alternative title, you pays your money and you takes your chance. Okay, so let's go with slide 1. So we have put the poll out for you, and I would like you to answer that poll for me. I can see that we've got lots of lovely answers coming through in the chat. So I'm going to let that just roll for a little bit longer. So please make sure you submit your vote, and I will come back to that. Now, the first thing I really want to talk about is you, because we are sometimes what's the word I need? We are sometimes looked over as professionals, and we really are professionals in our field. And I am really passionate about making sure that you actually identify where you sit in that professional standing, whether you're a starter in records management or whether you've been doing it for some time. And it's really important for me to think about using a skills framework. And as it says here, lower your odds from a professional perspective. If you use a skills framework, we can really see how your skills compare with your peers, because sometimes as well, we are working in a very small team for records management, or even a team of 1. So we can use something like the IRMS skills framework to identify with our line managers where we feel we sit on that professional scale. But most importantly, everyone, we can start to identify what you think you need to perform your role, and in terms of how you want to develop in that profession. So the first thing I want you to think about is you. And let's think about those skills that we need to be a professional within the records management space. I will pop the links to the skills matrix in the chat afterwards, and that's available on the IRMS pages. We've also got a YouTube video where it's explained to you how you can use that skills framework. The other thing I've done with that skills framework is not just thought about me as a professional, but I've also thought about how I need to interact with other professionals in my organisation. And I've used a skills framework to actually show them what skills I'm expecting them to exhibit. So, for example, an information asset owner. So I used the IRMS framework again, and I created a new tab, pulling all the expertise from the different places on the other tabs to make sure that I could say to my information asset owners, this is where I need you to be in order to do good information asset management. Okay, so don't be afraid to use it for other roles that have a records management component to them. So that's one way we can lower our odds. The other way we can lower our odds, so that's quite hard to say, is with professional development. And this is an actual IRMS conference photo from the last conference. So credit to John Knight Photography there, need to get that in. join a professional body. IRMS is just one, but there are other professional bodies available to us. Now, interestingly, at our last IRMS conference, we had a casino, so the theme is still running. I also think there is no excuse in terms of your professional development if we haven't got much cash, because there are lots of amazing free resources available to us that we can use to actually enrich our professional understanding in the records management field. I'm going to ask you now to interact, and if you've got any resources that you think the others in the room the virtual room need to understand, then please pop them in the chat. But a couple of things that I would recommend: JISC mail, and again I'll put the links onto this at the end. So JISC lists or JISC mail, you actually create an account and you choose which lists you want to join. Now those lists then they become email generators for you, and sometimes it can be a bit noisy, I'm going to be honest, but sometimes there's some real nuggets in there in relation to our professional understanding where people are asking questions or advice. I actually got my last job on JISC mail as well, as the DPO at the Care Inspectorate. So it's also good for looking for new opportunities. So JISC mail is amazing. Put any more ideas in the chat for me. The other thing I would say is in LinkedIn, follow people that are working in the same field as you. I'm on LinkedIn. I can put my link in at the chat. Please follow me, connect with me so we can have conversations. And I think we need to use that more, not for business development and marketing, but for actually our professional development. So how can we interact better on LinkedIn to actually have conversations where people are struggling in relation to things like retention schedules? You know, we should be messaging people. I actually do that. And I have conversations within the sort of the LinkedIn chat. I'm not seeing any other examples in my chat, but please, if you have any, please send them over to me. So what are our polls saying? So let's just have a look at who the audience is today. So we have the first one: how long have you been a records manager? And we've got pretty equally split between less than 1 year, 1 to 5 years, and over 5. So all in the low 30s. So that's interesting in itself. Have you had formal training? Yes are saying 35. A whopping no are saying 63%. That's shocking, isn't it? We are a profession. We should have professional training that allows us to move between those skill levels within our profession. If anyone wants to talk to me about that and how we can maybe get better messaging out there in order to demonstrate our needs in that space, really happy to help. And I do have something further on in the talk about selling our messages. Interestingly, the other aspect we've got there: do you use a professional skills framework? Oh, sorry, I've missed one out, haven't I? Do you know what? You can't trust me to read anything. I just jump ahead. So we've done the first one. The second one: have you had formal training? And we said that's a whopping 63% said no. If you have had formal training, when was it? So we've got some lucky people that had some less than 1 year ago. Fantastic. 1 to 5 years ago, not bad. More than 5 years ago, do we not think the world has moved on a little bit in records management in the last 5 years? I think it has, and we're going to talk about some reasons why I think it has a bit later on. It is important for our professional development and to deliver your role for the organisation to have that training in place. Do you use a professional skills framework? 70% plus said no. Please, please, please look at that skills framework that I'm going to pop the link into. It really is important that we identify our skills requirements. If we don't do it, who else is going to do it for us? Okay. Alison's comment's really interesting, but I'm going to come to all of those at the end. So professional development. Now, the value of records. Let's get into some purist records management terminology. The value of records, I think, is one of the most important things now to consider. So let's just think about what a record is. Now, there's an international standard that we all should be familiar with, which is ISO 15489. That should roll off the tongue for all of us, I would think. And that says that a record is information created, received, and maintained as evidence and as an asset by an organisation or person in pursuit of legal obligations or in the transaction of business. Interesting. I am going to throw that slightly out the window. I agree with the purist definition of a record, but I think the world has now changed. And in a spectrum of purist records management, with all our lovely definitions and things, and the realism of working practically in a digital environment, I think we have to make some compromises. And one of those compromises I think a lot of us make is that we don't actually identify a record. We have a pot of stuff that has an identity or a classification, which I'm going to come on to, such as HR records, but we're not necessarily identifying those purist records that are going to be preserved for a longer time. We don't have time to do that. Users don't want to interact with digital systems in that way. The volumes are too large. I think we need to give ourselves a break a little bit with that, and I'll talk a bit more about that when we talk about technology. So I do think we have to make some compromises. The international standard, though, does provide your baseline for defining things like your success factors when you're designing your records management program. And it does explain lots of different principles that we can apply to your organization. I am not saying we shouldn't aspire to that. What I'm saying is sometimes we might need to compromise in terms of how we need to practically achieve that with risk and resource. So what's all that got to do with the value of records? Well, the value of records is so important in terms of actually deciding where we want to apply the majority of our records management resource. Okay. Why? How? Lots of questions. The value of records. So there's two sort of areas that I want to just talk through. Ephemera. I love that word. I am sad, I know. Ephemera or ephemeral records have no ongoing value and are only normally needed for it to be retained for a short period within organisations. Okay, so they're transient. So what we really want to do is put less effort, less resource and less cash into those low value records than the records that we are seeing are high risk and high value. Now, I think it's really important when we're assessing our records to make sure that we're thinking actually what's high, medium or low. I'm back to my casino theme. PS, picture's still not great. So all records have a high, medium or low risk level. And we need to put more time and effort around our, not only our high value records, but also our high risk records. So things that may have a higher classification or sensitivity, depending on where you're working. If you're working in a government type environment or a public body, you might be using classifications such as official sensitive, such like. That's an easier way for us to identify those higher risk records. If you're not working in a space like that, actually we need to define what we mean by higher risk records, and then we can think about how we are managing them accordingly. So for example, with our lifecycle management, which we will talk about, for a low value record and a low risk record, we don't need a review on disposition, just get rid. If we've got a high risk, high value record, such as a social working file in relation to a case about a child, We want to review that material before it goes anywhere. That's high risk, high value versus low risk, low value. And we need to think about how we can actually establish that. So value of your records and risk of your records is actually so important. We're going to play a game because we're in a casino. This is obviously going to go wrong because I have a little embedded video, but we'll give it a go. And I need you to interact with me, please. I want lots of interactions in the chat. I can see some good things going on already. Okay, so I'm going to roll the dice. Anything that's a 5 or more is a high value record. Anything that's a 3 or 4 is a mid value record. And anything that's a 1 or 2 is a low value record. See, that bar always comes up. I got a 6. Right, I would like you to pop in the chat for me an example of a high value record. And I'm not going to stop talking. I'm not going to start talking again until I get at least one. High value record. Thank you, Mark. Oh, they're rushing in. Yes, medical records, important legal decisions. Oh, look at all those coming in. Amazing. Yeah, really good examples of high value. So we really need to make sure we're putting a proper protection around those. Role-based access control, potentially, thinking about the retention, making sure we review them, making sure that they're only accessible by those that need to see it. Already said RBAC. So there are high value. Okay, one more go. So this time, oh, I didn't fix this. A low value record. Can somebody give me an example of low value? The lowest, 1 and 2. Christmas cards. I love Christmas cards. Email confirmations. Yes. Duplicate copies. Don't get us started on duplicates. Yeah. Perfect. Save staff menu for Christmas party. Things like emails that say the electricity is going to be fixed in building 7 on Tuesday. Once it's happened, it's happened. Definitely. So low value. Keep them for the limited amount of time possible, and actually no review, just get rid. Okay. More difficult though is, let's see if I can get a mid value. Oh, I feel like you're going to think I'm cheating. I'm really not. What's in the middle, do we think? It's a mid value. Business case can be, although if it's actually something that we need to keep for a period of time, might not be. An invoice is a really interesting one. I kind of put that medium to low, because actually once the payments happened, you're right, it's a mid value. But then actually once that payment, once the invoice, let me start that sentence again. When we have an invoice that hasn't been paid, it's medium to high value, because actually we want that payment, don't we? So there's still an action to happen. But once that invoice has been paid and we just need to keep it for our 6 years and 1, low. And I wouldn't do a review on invoices. So I think that's a good example. FOI response, Mark said, can be mid value. I would suggest if there's been an appeal, the importance might go up. So sometimes we might want to split those requests that actually have been easy to answer for subject access as well. And those that actually there's been some shenanigans around them. So people have come back and said, we're not happy. I would keep them for longer. So I think they've got greater value. Presentations, really good one. Reference material. It's about what you think in your organisation. It's about your organisational context, isn't it? So actually what one person might say, so we've got Vishal saying quotes received and product brochures, and then we've got Christopher saying training materials. Actually, if you're a training company, those training materials are really actually your IP. So the value might go up. So it actually is context dependent. And I love that word, because each of you in your organisations have to work within a specific context. Think about what your context is. Statutory, regulatory, locally designed policy and procedure, political, whatever it might be. What's the context you're working with? What's your appetite to risk, for example? Because one organisation will be very different to another. So as a records manager, we not only need to understand our information and data and our records, but we need to understand the context within which we work. So I went from the National Crime Agency, which is all law enforcement, intelligence, operations, lots of high risk information in there, to the Care Inspectorate, which was very different in terms of context, because I went from law enforcement to sort of health, social care, those kind of records. But actually, quite often in organisations, the chunky bits are very similar. I like to use technical terms like chunky bits. So each of those organisations have corporate governance resource. So human resources, finance, legal. They might be doing different things, but actually they're very similar. But both of them also have an operational arm. In the National Crime Agency, it was actually law enforcement operations. In the Care Inspectorate, it was inspecting care services. It's still a kind of operational activity. So quite often, regardless of what organisation I'll go in, yes, the context might be very different, but how we're structured is actually, there's some common things that run across all organisations, I think. So hopefully my pretty poor casino game of rolling dice has helped to land that idea of value of records, because it's so important. And it means that we can actually think about, as I've said before, applying our resource and therefore reducing our risk in relation to our high value, high risk records. In terms of the where we record those, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Now, in any organisation, whether it's a casino or whether it's a public body, we will have records management house rules. Now, the definition of records management, again from 15489, is the field of management responsible for the efficient, like that word, and systematic, like that word even better because I'm a control freak, control of the creation, receipt, maintenance, use and disposition of records, including processes for capturing and maintaining evidence of and information about business activities and transactions in the form of records. That's too long for me. I think I shouldn't say this having been a DPO, but I'm not very good with my concentration. So I think I got a little bit bored about sentence 3 on that one. But we understand what records management is, and all of those words in there are so important. However we obtain, thank you, however we obtain a record, we need to always be thinking about actually the life cycle, don't we? So how are we actually going to manage that through its life cycle, and think about actually capturing it as soon as we possibly can into the corporate record? That is such an important principle. We don't want things hanging around in people's personal spaces, whether that's hard copy and desk drawers or whether that's in their OneDrive if you use Microsoft. We want things pulled into the corporate record as quickly as we can to make them available, not just to you, but for everybody else in the organisation. So records management definitions are so important. But we also need to think about, actually, what does that mean for us in the context of our organisation? So I like to think about it as information stewardship. What we are doing is making sure that all of the information throughout the organisation is not only created and captured effectively, but it's managed through its life cycle responsibly. And that actually includes things like security as well and role-based access control. We have to work with our colleagues in lots of different other professional functions, and I know some of you might be doing a bit of everything. So again, using the two organisations as an example, in the National Crime Agency, it was so vast. We had teams doing different things like information security, data protection, records management. In the Care Inspectorate, I had a very little team doing everything. We were still amazing, but there was just one team that had to be thinking about some aspects of information security, some aspects of data protection, So the context again is really important about how you are working. I actually think that the management of information through a life cycle is the most difficult thing that most organizations have to do. I still think it's the most difficult thing that most organizations have to do. You are battling. We are battling with people's views. We are battling with people's emotions sometimes about, you can't get rid of this. It's actually important to me to do my job. We are battling with technology. We've all been there where somebody's acquired a piece of kit and it doesn't do anything records management-y, another technical term, that we need it to do. So I think that is the most hard thing to do, but I'm going to help you through some ideas about how we can at least pick off our high risk, high value and what tools we can use to do it. And that basically comes into stack your chips before you play. What are the fundamental things before we even start to think about policies and procedures and how we want people to work? What are the fundamentals that I don't think an organisation can do without? A business classification scheme that might be embedded in your information asset register, which may be combined with your record of processing activity. I'm not saying whether that should or shouldn't. I'm saying some organisations do that. And your retention schedule. Again, depending on the size of your organisation, depends on whether it is appropriate to actually have all those things in one. I quite like that approach because it means I'm managing one thing that's underpinning all of my governance within an organisation. And that's how we designed it in the Care Inspectorate. I'm also helping an organisation that provides mental health services to actually do the same thing. So let's talk about each of these independently. And I know this can be a bit boring, but please bear with me because to me, there is nothing more important than these three items. Three or four. I couldn't do a casino picture for this. If anyone's got any ideas, bring them on. But I've had to go revert to some purist examples here. A business classification scheme, it does not have to be complicated. It needs to map how your information is structured within your organisation. And I don't mean structured in terms of your organisational organogram. I mean structured in terms of how it underpins your function and processes. So the example on the slide that we've got is in relation to the different levels. So at the top, you have a function, and that function could be human resources or personnel management. The one below, some ideas coming through about what I could do for a BCS. The one below is the activity. So within HR, we've got lots of different activities that we do potentially, again, depending on your organisation. So one of the activities we do is recruitment. Now, I never go further down that list unless I have to. And I'm going to tell you when I have to. I have to go into transactions when the classification scheme doesn't lend itself to map with my information assets. And I'm going to talk to you about information assets in a minute. So for retention, I didn't use the wrong word. For recruitment, it was an R word. The transactions I would think about are advertising, application form processing. Third one would be interviewing, and the fourth one, pre-employment checks. Any ideas why I think we've got to go down to that level for that recruitment example? Any ideas in the chat? Why would I just not stick at HR for a business classification? Yeah, different rules, different retention, different data, different value. Loving it, loving the interaction in the chat. So yes, so my advertising data, open source, out there. Actually, if I lose that tomorrow, it's not the end of the world. Application forms will have personal data. They're going to be higher risk. There might be stuff in there in relation to reasonable adjustments. We might have special category data. We might have things where somebody is laying out their history of their employment. And actually, I think that's quite sensitive if someone was trying to impersonate that person for one reason or another. So we've got lots of different information in there that actually makes it higher risk and higher value than my advertising data. I think the application data and the interviewing material is very similar. We're going to be having similar discussions around similar data. And again, we might have those special categories again. The last one, in terms of pre-employment checks, is potentially the most sensitive data, the highest risk. Depending on the context of your organisation, we might have things like criminal conviction checks, DBS checks, as we call them sometimes. We might be having checks in relation to health. People might be having actual physicals, depending what kind of job they're doing. So that is my most sensitive or my highest risk and highest value data. All of that information should not be stored in the same pot. Whenever I create a business classification scheme, I always have one eye on an information architecture that I want to deploy in a system. How would I actually manage this practically? Because if we don't, we can't then lift that business classification scheme into something like SharePoint. It's not going to help us, okay? We're going to have to do a load more work. So your business classification scheme, come down the levels when you really have to. You could stick at function if everything in that function is pretty, I was going to use the homogeneous word, but I can never normally get it out of my head, but I managed that time. So only come down the layers with a business classification when you really have to, and then lift that into your information asset register. Okay. The second thing, information assets. So for information assets, according to the National Archives in England and Wales, a body of information defined and managed as a single unit so it can be understood, shared, protected and exploited effectively. It has recognisable and manageable, wait for it, value, risk, content and life cycle. If I get my business classification right, I think in my practical rather than my purist way, I'm identifying my information assets as well. Okay, because my example for HR again, for recruitment, my pre-employment checks, actually the information asset is pre-employment data or pre-employment information or pre-employment checks. It's the same thing because we've created it in such a way that when the flavour of the data changes, whether it's value, retention, risk, we have created another level. So we've created more information assets in that space. Okay. Thumbs up if everyone's still awake. Use some interactive tools. Yay, that's good. Fantastic. Okay, so information assets are so important. And the other reason they are so important is that we need to make sure we are treating our information in those buckets, because with digital, we cannot treat each item individually, can we? It's too vast. So your information assets gives you a way of popping them into an information asset register, which should then be a one-stop shop for all your information knowledge. So on my information asset register, I like to put in business continuity factors. Is this a critical asset? If this asset wasn't available to us tomorrow, was the business going to stop, basically? Yes or no? Accountability, who's responsible for that information asset? We need to make people within our organisation accountable. Risk and value, of course, is in there. And as I've said, we can combine that with the ROPA. Lifecycle management. We know how difficult this is. There's just a couple of things I want to touch on with this. Put your retention in your information asset register based on your business classification scheme. Put them all together in one place. Retention in a digital space, we need to potentially make compromises again, because it's too hard to put our granular purist retention policies into tech. Okay, so we might need to do that. We might have primary and secondary life cycles. In the Care Inspectorate, we collected information, as you can imagine, about vaccination throughout the pandemic of our employees and others that were working in care services. That information then became of interest for analysis. So the primary requirement for that data was actually about, is it safe to do something? Is Rachel Mitchell okay to go into that building and do X, Y, Z? The secondary life cycle is taking all the names out of it, obviously. What did we understand about that data? How many people got vaccinated? What statistical analysis in relation to that, which should be feeding our thinking if, heaven forbid, we end up in some other kind of situation like that. So information can have primary and secondary life cycles, but remember your data protection friends, records managers, there needs to be a lawful basis for both. Okay, so we need to make sure there's still a lawful basis for us using that information. And quite often by anonymizing something, we can make sure we're using it. Make sure you have a technical asset list in your organization that you understand, records managers. It needs to be also on your information asset register what single or multiple technologies support that asset. Again, I'm doing this at the moment with an organization. So it means that if something happens to one of the technical assets, and it's got lots of information on there that people that manage those technical assets need to understand, like multi-factor authentication, all of that good stuff. If something happened to one of those technical assets, I can then look immediately on my information asset register and say, what data does that underpin? Where's my risk now? And get all those information asset owners involved to say, actually, we're going to have to do something about this tech because all of these critical business processes are now failing. And unfortunately, I don't know if anybody saw the news in relation to that poor company in Northamptonshire where it closed with 700 employees because of one issue with one password that let a cybersecurity attack in. Technology has never been more important. Unfortunately, as records managers, we have to understand it. I've talked about making sure that we have the right things embedded in technology. I've touched on that. So I think what we need to also make sure with technology is that your requirements are there from a records management perspective when we're requiring this stuff, not when it's already in and we're trying to fudge it. We need to be speaking to our technology colleagues about making sure we are doing that. Another bad picture. It's not as bad as some of the others. Email. Managing emails as a record. There are 3 approaches that you can take. In place management, where we manage it where it's created, such as Outlook. We can also have out of place management where we move the email or ask some of our colleagues to do that. And the third one is hybrid management. I am going to say the world according to Rachel on this. I never have time to move emails from my Outlook account without a third party tool into a storage space that I'm supposed to store my records. I think we're up to a losing battle if we're trying to do that. I just don't see people interacting with it unless we make it really easy by using, as I've said, a third party tool. Email for me should be managed in place. And I think there's a lot of people now considering not about business classification, but considering about the role-based email approach, which is also called the Capstan approach, which started in federal US government, where we manage email accounts according to the role of the person. Okay, not about the content. And I would really advocate that. So look that up. Okay, we're doing well. We're email management. I am not skipping past this because I think email is not an issue. I think email is the biggest issue apart from lifecycle management that we have as records managers, and I'm happy to talk about that. I want to leave time for questions. I've mentioned information architecture. Information architecture is the discipline of organising and structuring our information, including our records, in a digital environment. And I think your BCS is the thing to use to think about your information architecture. We should be thinking how we record our information, not just in terms of our information asset register and such like, but how practically should we store things? So I do support for creating architecture in Microsoft 365, for an example. Happy to talk about any other systems, but that just seems to be the one that everyone's interested in at the moment. I am passionate about putting information architecture into M365 and other tech, because otherwise it's too complicated for the users, our colleagues, and it's too complicated for us. If we're basing our information architecture on our business classification and our information asset register, we're told what sensitivity label to use. We are told what role-based access control we should be considering. And for the users, we basically say, store it there and the governance will come. And for me, that's a win-win. So information architecture is so important. And please make sure that you take advice if you don't understand information architecture and how it can be applied in systems, because I was fobbed off a lot before I decided to take the hood off myself and have a little look. I was told as an information governance person, oh, you can't do that. You can do what you like. It might be a bit tricky in some areas, but there's ways of working it in your information architecture, particularly your business classification, your retention, and your information asset management. Oh, getting our message across. Oh, unfortunately, a lot of people that are in this field, we're of a certain control freak kind of nature that we actually don't like putting our heads above the parapet very much. I am talking, I do talk, doesn't mean I enjoy it, everybody. But we do need to be able to communicate to people and market our records management function. Now, please don't communicate from our perspective. We don't want to be going in and saying things like, if you perform good records management, we are legally and regulatory compliant. I have to use that voice, sorry. What we want to do is say, if you perform good records management, you will actually find we can improve your processes and cut down the time it takes for your team to do stuff. Which do you think's better? I know which one I prefer if I was on the other end of it. Come at it from their angle, not yours. We can work our angle in once we've got our foot in the door. It's about the people you're working with. And if you're struggling with messages, I think there's 3 key drivers that we can think about. One is risk. And risk for me always opens doors, because quite often our information risk is reported through our normal risk mechanism, and it's assessed and assured by external people in our organisation. Press the risk button. Have a really good risk register for information that feeds into our organisational risk mechanism. That's one way people sit up and listen, because we don't like to wash our dirty linen in public. So that's in terms of thinking about your risk score, which of course we get by thinking about the impact and the likelihood. Okay. Impact will not often change over time. because the impact of data loss or the impact of sending that email to the wrong person with that data attached is not going to change. It's normally the likelihood that we can change. So we need to think about how we can reduce the likelihood that that risk is going to become real. It's going to become an issue. So we need to reduce our risk. I like this picture, just saying. I think that's my favourite. It's only because I said drape me in diamonds, because I'm on the high roller table. So risk is really, really important. Diamonds are a girl's best friend, apparently. Somebody I saw has popped in the chat. Exciting times for IM. So my first exciting time, AI. I know you're hearing this message everywhere, but AI isn't new, although its buzz is reaching absolute peak levels, isn't it? It's a fabulous driver for good information management. I also did this in ChatGPT. You will have heard the mantra rubbish in and rubbish out. And there are two things we need to do to make AI more effective. Actually, there's three. One, make sure our information architecture is tight and our role-based access and permissions model is tight around that information architecture. That also comes back to your business classification scheme, your IAR, and your retention. We also need to make sure that we're getting rid of our redundant, obsolete, and trivial material. Getting that retention working in our technology with our information architecture so that we are not surfacing legacy data that should have been deleted by law. Okay, we can help with that. I can help with that. Think about how we can do this. And also think about, actually, they're the messages we want to be trying to use to sell our products. We are marketeers. You might not want to be, but you are. So we need to make sure that we're selling those messages to our grown-ups, as I like to call them. Sustainability, somebody else mentioned this in the chat, I think it was Geraldine. The big issue of the last calendar year or two has been the buzz in relation to carbon footprint. And this is my favourite stat, I think. If each adult sent one less email a day, Britain could reduce its carbon output by 16,433 tonnes, which is equal to more than 81,000 flights from London to Madrid. It's massive, people. I am becoming a bit of a green obsessive with no single use of anything. It's driving my husband mad. Kitchen roll, no, we've got cloths. This is so shocking. And I did see on LinkedIn somebody had actually put in the chat the other day about the fact that actually the development of data centers is really good for the economy and for everything else. Yes, but is it really good in terms of sustainability? I will always say Tom Jackson is the authority on this from Loughborough University. And if you haven't seen him or spoken to him or seen his posts, find him on LinkedIn. He is fantastic. Sustainability is therefore also something we can use to sell our message. We have to work as a team. We cannot work in isolation. Make sure you have an organisational space that you can have common and often regular meetings in relation to information, data and its management with data protection, information, governance colleagues, cybersecurity, whoever it is. We need to make sure that we are having those conversations. Training, raising awareness, again, just try and think differently. Don't do the normal, everyone should complete their statutory training on information governance by the 3rd of April. It doesn't work. People just flip through it. Think differently, little and often, posters, things that pop up when they log in. We can all do this with our technology. So what messaging do you want to get across? What's the high level principles that you want to be fueling your records management? And we need to measure. We need to understand not only when we're doing well, So have your own key performance indicators linked to your skills test, but also make sure that you have key performance indicators that are realistic in terms of what you are going to achieve year on year. Okay, if you can't show progress, you won't get funding. If you can't show the problems that you're facing to start with, you won't get funding. So we need to communicate, we need to indicate through risk and whatever's available to us where we are broken, what's our as is position, and what's the to be position you're trying to get to, and prioritize that. It is okay to tolerate a risk for a period of time, as long as you've identified when you are then going to deal with it. Okay. A little freebie, we have the QR code, and I promise it goes to the right place. It's not a fake one or something that's for phishing or quishing, as it's called now. In Leadership Through Data, that is a no obligation QR code that does an assessment for you about how you and your organisation are doing in terms of your information and records management. And if you want any more information about any of that, we can talk to you about it. Phew-wee, gone a little bit over, but I know we've got lots of things in the chat, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I don't think there are any sort of huge questions. There are people interacting beautifully with one another about all the different elements. So if you've got some questions, sort of very specific questions you'd like to put to Rachel, then please ask. Oh, Geraldine has asked who produced the statistic on reducing 1 email a day.
Yeah, I've got that. I will pop that in the chat as we're finishing off. I'm going to go back to, then I sort of stop sharing, and then I can pop some things in the chat for you, which will make it easier than you having to look at my slides again.
And I can certainly recommend the guys from Loughborough. They did the closing keynote for the 2024 conference, and they, bearing in mind we'd all been on the go for 2 days, completely non-stop for 2 days. They had everybody absolutely enthralled. It was a brilliant presentation, and Ren Leeming and Jana Pinnick are actually working on the IRMS's response to that, so that's really important as well in terms of being part of the IRMS. So
no, definitely.
So we've got I'd be interested in resources for understanding information architecture, please.
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to probably contact me on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn, or contact me through Leadership Through Data. I will pop my email in the chat.
I will just remind people that the chat closes when I close the meeting. So if you need to be grabbing things out of the chat, please do so before we end the meeting. So we've got another question. Do you need the highest license for M365 for best governance and records management? In education, we can't get higher than AE3 financially.
Yeah, so this is a problem we come across all the time. You can still get your architecture right, so we can still make it easy for people to do the right thing. We just can't do as many of the automated retention things that we would like to do. So it's still possible. And again, get in touch with me on the email and we can always have a chat about that. No obligation chat. I'm here as a records manager and an accredited member of the IRMS, so I'm always happy to chat through people's issues and problems. Did you pop the link to the skills framework, Elizabeth? Just wondering.
I didn't, but
Sorry,
I can
got
do.
it here.
Yeah. So you have another question. Do you have an example of an effective KPI that you've used?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the one in relation to always think about your as is behaviour. So for example, if I turn up in an organisation, I will always look for what the biggest risk factors are for me. So normally it's review retention. So I will look at what we are deleting at that point in time and put that into sort of gigabytes or whatever kind of measure I can do. And normally it's 0 or close to if I'm going in as a consultant. And then I will do monthly reporting once we've got the review and retention tools starting to kick in, or our processes starting to kick in. I will then show actually how much we are then deleting over time and link that to cost of storage if I can. Sometimes that's not easy, or to sustainability. So some of the stats that we've seen before. So that's an example of a good KPI, I think.
Okay, thank you.
It's also good for your CV to show, like your appraisal, to show that you've done that. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to say, at the moment, I can't see any more questions, and we are just coming up to 2 o'clock. So I would say we've already got time for one more question if anybody can get in quickly. If
Please
not,
just get in touch with me, email, LinkedIn, whatever you want to do. Cats, I love talking about this stuff because I am a control freak.